The cars of the future versus the cars everyone's driving. These ones are fancy. They're fast and fuel-free. And no, sadly, it probably won't be a Porsche. But most of you will be driving an electric vehicle one day. The question is when? And what's stopping you from buying one? It could be the petrol heads and the ordinary drivers who just love the sound and the feel of what they know. And there's someone else, the government. They won't convince you, even though they know electric cars are the future. The problem is, fuel excise will disappear. Right now, you pay about 40 cents a litre in tax every time you fill up. They're still trying to work out how to tax you, as it risks losing a whopping $2 billion a year. So until that's solved, you won't see charging stations everywhere. But you need to demand it, and demand incentives. And tonight, we may even convince the rev heads that this is the future. Dispelling the myths on costs, power, efficiency, charge time, where you can charge them, servicing and energy. Like, are these cars really clean? Welcome to Flashpoint. Good evening. There is no doubt that they are coming and the world is getting on with it. 1 in 20 new cars sold in China is electric. The UK will ban new sales of petrol cars from 2030, while California has mandated that by 2035. But Australia is nowhere close to those targets. So is enough being done to pave the way for the future? Joining us on our Flashpoint panel tonight, Chief Executive Officer of the Motor Trade Association of WA, Stephen Moir. Pete Petrovsky from the Tesla Owners Club of WA. Managing Director of Future Smart Strategies, Professor Ray Wills. And General Manager of Corporate Affairs at RAC, Will Golsby. Also tonight, why is WA so far behind the rest of the nation and the rest of the world? The Minister joins me to discuss WA's electric car policy. Pete Rosethorn hits the streets in the hunt for a charging station. Plus the role player managers have in the AFL. Andrew McDougall joins Woosha and Ryan Daniels. I'll ask you first, Will. How many electric cars do we currently have on the roads here in WA?
Well, there's around 1,200 electric cars on the roads in WA and around 14,500 nationally. So the only way is up for the electric car.
The state and federal governments will tell you that they're doing a lot to pave the way for electric vehicles. Is that a lie?
We think nationally we're lagging behind the rest of the world, and in WA we're lagging behind the rest of the nation. So clearly we need to do much more. We want a nationally coordinated approach to electric vehicles. We're seeing all the other states move to implementing strategies. They're not only just about the EV, they're also about the incentives around EV, charging stations, and we're not there yet.
Pete, you're a very proud Tesla owner, like a kid in a candy shop when you get into that car. Why did you embrace electric vehicle technology?
For me, it was just plainly obvious there was a superior product to the alternative. It's a car with no compromises, and I'm referring to safety, performance, reliability, the environment, the convenience. As I said, it's the safest car on the road. There is no car that comes anywhere near the safety rating of the Model 3.
Stephen, I know you don't share that kind of enthusiasm for the electric vehicle. Why not?
I think Will's right. We are so far behind the rest of the world.
Yeah.
I mean, in Europe, for instance, they have over 200 different models, and around 38 of those are priced between $30,000 and $60,000.
Yep.
In Australia, we have 28 models, and only 8 are valued under $60,000. So, I mean, one of the reasons we're not seeing a take-up is there's simply no choice in the marketplace, and it's the federal government that really needs to look. About 80% of the international car markets have a carbon system in place that penalises manufacturers for bringing petrol and diesel cars in, and they can offset that against electric. We haven't even started to think about that, and that's our big issue.
In the last election campaign, Scott Morrison famous accused the then opposition leader of trying to take away people's weekends by saying electric vehicles couldn't tow a boat, like you couldn't go camping in them. Was he right?
No, they're very misinformed, and he really needed to go back and have a look at the facts behind electric cars. They can do a great deal more than what we were saying, but governments are setting what I see as ridiculous targets. I mean, the EU have just said that by 2035 there will be no registered petrol or diesel cars on the market. Now, there's 250 million cars in the European Union right now, and we've got 11 years to make the shift. For me, it just seems a little bit unachievable. We need to make the moves, and you do need to have targets, but they've got to be realistic.
Ray, are those ridiculous targets sometimes necessary to spur people into action?
They are, and for the most part, in my view, they're conservative. We're going to do it faster than that, not
Is that
slower.
right?
Yes.
Well, in the UK and in California, those sorts of places?
Yeah, the reason being that we are every year getting to a cheaper price point in vehicles.
Yeah.
My view and published view is that by 2023 in Australia, we will actually reach price parity with electric vehicles to ICE vehicles, which means that there's the same ticket price. At that point, we see a switch point in which car makers who make cars will say, I don't want to build another diesel and have it sit in the paddock. I'm going to build an electric car instead.
Yep.
And so the consequence of that is we're actually moving to a more rapid transition. As certain as death and taxes, EVs will arrive faster.
Are we going to see, though, if we get that sort of flood of EVs here, queues at charging points?
90% of us don't go that far. So 90% of us can recharge at home with, if you've got somewhere to plug a kettle in, you can charge an electric car. And most of us will get home at night and simply recharge overnight when actually energy prices are actually really cheap. And as a consequence, we'll walk out the next morning and the car will be full again.
Well, can you tell us about some of the incentives that other Australian states are talking about?
There's lots of things the other states are doing right now. A lot of their strategies is about infrastructure, but it's about incentives. It's around reducing rego fees, capping rego fees. There's ideas around cheaper parking for EVs. All the other states are releasing them. We have a bit of a stronger focus on infrastructure, but incentives need to come into the market. We need to bring the EVs. We know the demand is there. We know it's growing. The barrier has shifted from range anxiety to cost, and incentives are a huge part of allowing the community to embrace EVs and bring them into the market.
Should our government, state or federal, or both, be offering rebates, just straight up rebates for people who want to invest in that technology?
Well, we think it's a broader mix than just rebates. I mean, that's one lever to pull. Ultimately, for us, this is about cleaner and healthier air for current and future generations as well.
Pete, if you don't mind me asking, how much tax, or, stamp duty did you pay on your car?
Way too much, Tim.
Yeah.
I'll give you another example. The top model Tesla Model S Plaid, if you were to buy that today, you would pay about $56,000 in taxes.
Just in tax?
Just in tax.
And what's the drive-away price of one of those?
It's an expensive car, okay? So fair enough. But when we're talking about cars or electric cars, let's not focus on the upfront cost, because that's not the right way to look at it. You need to look at it in terms of the total cost of ownership. And if you look at it that way, you'll probably find that if you were to buy a Tesla Model 3 Standard Range Plus versus an average $40,000 car in Australia, after only about 3 years, once you take depreciation into account, once you take into account fuel costs, maintenance, registration, insurance, the whole lot, you'll probably find that you're in front.
Do you agree with those numbers, Stephen? And I know you've got a different take on the clean and green argument too, haven't you?
Well, look, in Australia, we are still heavily reliant on fossil fuels for energy generation, and that's the big problem. So it's a little bit hypocritical of federal governments particularly mandating targets for the uptake for consumers to buy electric cars when they're still pumping coal and natural gas into power stations. We need to change that as a priority. So that's one of the issues. The running costs in Australia are very different to Europe and the US. The running costs here is about 10 cents a kilometre on average is what's been looked at in difference. Now, you have to do a lot of kilometres. The average car does 15,000. You have to do a lot of kilometres to actually catch up the gap between what a conventional car would be to what the electric model would be. So we need to get the pricing down on electric cars to make them more affordable. My big fear is we don't price out those who can least afford to have a transport option by taxing them for fuel and taxing them for everything else to pay for someone who can afford an electric car.
Ray, to the petrol heads, what would you say to them to try to get them on board?
Look, if they haven't been in a fast Tesla yet, then when they do, they'll never leave one. If they truly love speed and performance, there's nothing that can beat the torque of an electric vehicle. There's absolutely nothing. I think the final point that Stephen I'll address is emissions. Emissions in an electric vehicle are absolutely less than an equivalent ICE car. even in Australia where we do have coal burning, and in particular because every year we're adding solar and wind to our network, and every year the emissions from an electric vehicle recharging off of the standard network is reduced.
Ray, can I ask you, if you were in charge of government policy,
Yep.
what are you going to do?
There's some really simple things. The very first thing I'd do in government is start saying, I'm going to electrify my fleet, because we'd immediately deliver on producing demand for electric vehicles in Australia. You do the same with the bus network. We're still buying diesel buses in WA. That's absolutely nuts. China's got 500,000 of them on the streets. And that's just extraordinary. But we haven't yet taken the opportunity in WA to electrify our bus fleet when we actually replace 90 buses a year, and they're still being replaced by diesel. That's just crazy nuts in my view.
All right, let's get to our guest Flashpoints now, the single most important thing that they want you to take away from tonight's conversation. Will, I'll start with you.
We're on the cusp of an EV future. We think the momentum is building, demand's growing, and the barriers are starting to shift. And we ultimately want to have cleaner and healthier air for our current and future generations, but it's going to take real action. So when it comes to EVs, we know the community want to embrace them. We absolutely know the car makers want to supply them. Government just needs to back them.
Pete, your Flashpoint tonight?
My advice to anyone looking into an EV is do your own research. Speak to someone that's actually get the information from the horse's mouth. Speak to someone that's actually owned a Tesla for a reasonable period of time. The Tesla Owners Club of Western Australia has 300 members. They're more than happy to share their experiences. And if that still doesn't convince you, rent a car for a week and see how it actually fits in with your family lifestyle, with your personal circumstances. And that way you're making an informed, educated decision based on your circumstances rather than listening to the FUD.
All right, maybe we'll just put your details on our Facebook page, Pete. Stephen, your Flashpoint tonight?
Yeah, as a priority, the incoming federal government, because we will have an election in the next 12 months, has to introduce mandatory carbon targets for manufacturers of motor vehicles. Volkswagen have said, and Volkswagen are one of the world's largest producers of electric vehicles, that if the Australian government had carbon targets, they would bring cars into Australia. Right now, there's no incentive for them to do that, so that's why we're not getting product into this country. So they have to start doing that, catch up with the rest of the world.
Thank you. Ray?
Look, I think the one thing is that there is certainty that electric vehicles are arriving now, not tomorrow. We'll have greater choice tomorrow. In 2022, we should expect a lot more models. 2023 is when we'll start to reach price point. Those that need to wait can, and then after that, it's just lay down misère, where we will have electric vehicles and the choice will be there. It's just time to buy. If your time to buy isn't now, then I'd delay your purchase.
Panellists, thanks for your insights. Coming up next on Flashpoint, is our government doing enough? I asked the Minister responsible about our strategy for the future. Minister, we have less than 2,000 of these registered on WA roads, electric vehicles. Why are they still such a novelty in 2021?
Oh, look, one of the biggest barriers, Tim, to EVs in Western Australia is what we call range anxiety, and that's a very reasonable concern that people are going to run out of charge when they're driving around. There just isn't the charging infrastructure in WA, particularly along the coast. So if you live in a regional community, it's pretty unlikely that you're going to choose an EV. So that's why the state government is making a $21 million investment in chargers all the way up the coast. So essentially those chargers will go from Esperance all the way through Perth up to Kununurra.
Just talking about that investment, I understand from the announcement around November last year, 3 years you set yourself to build those charging stations. What's the progress been?
So far, the utilities have gotten together and put together the business case. That's now going through the budget process.
So we still don't have any yet of those promised?
Those charging stations will go out to tender later this year, and they will progressively be rolled out up to the next 3 years. So it won't be 3 years until we get the first ones. It'll take around 3 years to roll them out. They'll all be the same kind of charging station, and it'll be consistent pricing. So every single station will have the fast chargers. When you're on holiday and you're driving up the coast, you should be able to stop at a small town and charge your car within 15 to 30 minutes.
Are we using range anxiety as an excuse not to be a little bit more proactive in building that infrastructure?
Look, it's a good question. There's a lot of barriers at the moment for EV uptake, and one of those is essentially in Australia, in Western Australia, we don't have a lot of choice. So if you have a family and you need to have 7 seats and you need a bigger car, or you work in a job that requires a larger vehicle, there just isn't the choice. And part of that is because currently the federal government hasn't moved as fast as the rest of the world in our fuel emission standards. And it's those fuel emission standards which drives the electric vehicle market. So essentially we are becoming a bit of a dumping ground for those cars that are high emitting.
So incentives for people to buy an EV, which has been part of the New South Wales plan. We've seen also some figures bandied around for user charges on the road for electric vehicle users. Are they within your scope at all here in Western Australia? Are we going to see incentives for people to take up EVs here?
Well, our number one priority is rolling out the infrastructure for WA, and we're a very unique state because we are so large. Not only is the road system large, but the electricity network is large and complex. So everything that we do needs to be carefully staged so that we're not putting an unnecessary load on the electricity grid and creating other issues at peak times.
I suppose just from the lay perspective, they might think that we're just in no hurry. The rest of the world is leaving us behind. Less than 1% of our new vehicle sales in 2020 was electric. Compare that with about 10% in the UK, Norway, 75%. We are so far behind here, and we need leadership from government at state and federal level. So what can you offer us in terms of, you know, something tangible and proactive that we're going to see in the near future to get us up with the rest of the world?
Well, look, I would agree. We are behind the 8 ball as a nation on electric vehicles, and we have lacked leadership from a Commonwealth level, and that's why the state governments are all stepping into that space. So we are absolutely committed to building this infrastructure, which will provide the spine of the network so that people can have confidence and buy electric vehicles. We'll look in future what other policy mechanisms are available, but right now the biggest barrier is actually being able to charge your vehicle when you're out and about, so that's why we're committing to this infrastructure.
Okay. Minister, thanks for your time. Coming up, Woosha and Andrew McDougall join Ryan Daniels to discuss the role of the AFL player manager. But first, here's Pete Rosethorn.
Well, I've come to Leaderville to see if I can find a place to charge my electric car. If I had one, I couldn't even find a PowerPoint and electric lane. That's ridiculous. Let's go and see what people think of electric cars, everyone.
They're futuristic, but I don't know, I still feel like people want to have the good old, stick shift, like the Porsche GT3 RS.
Something with a motor in it.
Exactly.
We were looking at the Tesla, the big Tesla.
Is there a big one?
Wow.
Is there a people mover?
Sort of.
Is there?
Yeah.
How much is that?
Like 150.
You?
Yeah.
Youch. As we buy an old bus.
Yes. Much better idea.
Planning on getting a next car's electric.
How long before you get one?
When the prices come down a bit.
Well, how far down?
Probably 50, 60,000.
How much are you willing to pay for an electric car?
The same amount as I pay for my normal car, but don't see why it has to be more expensive.
I couldn't help but notice you're getting into a high-performance electric vehicle, sir.
Absolutely, yes.
Are you happy with it?
Well, I deliver half of Leaderville and I've never come close to running out of electricity.
Would you purchase a car with the same capability?
If I had a spare 100 grand, I'd treat myself to a Tesla, yeah.
Would you buy an electric car next time you buy a car?
Yeah, I would.
Would you?
Yeah.
Would you really?
Why not?
Would you accept the hybrid hybrid?
Absolutely. Yeah, are you serious? I'd get 900 k's to the tank.
I just want to go fast.
But quietly?
Yeah, because the cops can't hear where we are 5 streets away.
I've met a group of green tradies. This is bullshit.